Gregory apparently died of an overdose. At first, the police treated the case as a suicide, but when the body was examined a second time, two details caught their attention. The first was bronchopneumonia, the second was something even more curious, strange. His bladder contained about 550 ml of urine. For those who aren't in the medical field, this might not seem like a big deal, right? But the truth, according to specialists, is that these two elements together indicate a very specific situation. Normally, a person starts to feel the urge to urinate when the bladder reaches around 150 ml, and when it goes over 400, the need becomes urgent. In other words, someone with more than half a liter of urine accumulated would hardly be able to ignore it. Bronchopneumonia, on the other hand, can occur when a person spends a long time without being able to expel secretions from the lungs. These two signs usually appear in patients who are unconscious or deeply sedated. And this indicated that Gregory possibly remained in this state for between 6 and 12 hours. Then before he died, the problem is that there was a report saying that he was conscious shortly before his death. If that were true, that state of unconsciousness simply wouldn't make sense, would it? It was this contradiction that started to raise doubts. Did Gregory really decide to end his own life? Or was someone hiding what happened inside that house? I'm Marcos Campos, and that's what we're going to try to find out in today's episode. Every week on the channel, we post at least 3 new episodes, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Turn on notifications so you don't miss out. Leave a like or comment, even an emoji. If possible, please become a member. It really helps me produce these episodes. Deal? Well, to understand how this story happened, we need to go back to the beginning, right? Let's get to the facts. Christine Margaret Brossom was born in 1976 in Memphis, Tennessee, but she hardly grew up there. When she was still a child, her family moved to Claremont, California. That was because of her father's career, Ralph Rawson, who was a university professor. Her mother, Constance, also worked in academia at Azusa Pacific University. It was a well-structured family with good financial standing and a strong focus on education. Christine was the oldest daughter and had 2 younger siblings. During her childhood, everything indicated that she would have a very stable life. She studied at good schools, had access to great opportunities, and was seen as a very intelligent and friendly girl. But when Christine was around 15 years old, her family went through another important change. Her father accepted a new position as president of Hampton-Sydney College. They all moved to the state of Virginia. Christine was then enrolled in an all-girls private school, St. Catherine's School in Richmond. And it was during this period that the first problems began. Like many teenagers, she started experimenting with alcohol, cigarettes, and other drugs. There, shortly after, came marijuana, and it wasn't long before Christine started using methamphetamine. At around 16 years old, that teenager who had always been the model daughter started causing a lot of trouble and headaches for her parents. The next 2 years were marked by conflicts at home and constant worry from the family about her behavior. Despite that, when she finished high school, Christine decided to go back to California. In 1994, she enrolled at the University of Redlands. Even though the course wasn't full-time, she decided to live in a dormitory on campus. But during that time there, the problem with drugs came back. Christine ended up having a relapse into chemical dependency. Shortly after, she dropped out of college. A new phase. After dropping out of her first college, Christine went through a tough period, but over time, she managed to get her life back on track and everything else. So she went back to studying, and this time it was at San Diego State University. It was during this time that she met a guy named Gregory T. Develers. The two started dating while she was still at the university. They talked a lot and got closer. Greg was described by people close to him as a very calm guy, very polite, and dedicated to his studies. The relationship progressed very quickly. In 1998, Christine graduated with honors. Then, the following year, in '99, she and Greg got married. For those watching from the outside, it seemed like the perfect life, a life that had finally gotten on track after so many stumbles and derailments. Not long after graduation, Christine landed a very important job. She started working as a toxicologist at the medical examiner's office in the county where she was living. Her job involved analyzing substances found in toxicology tests, helping to determine if drugs or medications were related to the cause of a person's death. It was an extremely technical environment, directly connected to criminal investigations. But while her professional life was advancing, some things started to get out of control. In the year 2000, about a year after the wedding, Christine started an extramarital affair. Just watch. And the person she was getting involved with wasn't just any co-worker. Let's see if you can guess. It was her boss from the lab where she worked, a forensic doctor named Michael Robertson. The day of death, the day. The relationship between Christine and Dr. Michael ended up creating a delicate situation in that work environment. They tried to keep it a secret, but at the same time, Christine's personal life was starting to get more and more complicated. Her marriage to Greg was going through a difficult time. At this point, and a few weeks later, all of this would take a completely unexpected turn. It was on the afternoon of November 6, 2000, around 9:15 in the morning, at night, that a call was made to their emergency number, their 911. On the other end of the line, a woman said that her husband wasn't feeling well, he wasn't breathing. Emergency teams were immediately sent to the location. When the paramedics arrived at the scene, they found Gregory de Villers unconscious on the bedroom bed. He had no pulse, and despite resuscitation attempts, Gregory was eventually declared dead shortly after at the hospital. Inside the room, there were some details that immediately caught their attention. On the bed, there were red rose petals scattered, and under a pillow, there was a photograph of the couple's wedding, which had taken place the previous year. As we saw, there was no note, no message, but the initial examination revealed the presence of a large amount of medication. Given that, the hypothesis raised at that moment was intentional overdose. In other words, poor Gregory had ended his own life. Did he find out about his wife's extramarital affair? And based on that initial conclusion, the investigation practically stopped there, but not everyone believed that version. So, we can say it was hasty, and among the people most bothered by this was Jeremy, Gregory's brother. He knew his brother very well and simply couldn't accept it. The idea that Greg had decided to end his life didn't make sense to Jeremy. So, he started doing what the police weren't doing. Isn't that investigating more thoroughly? He started looking into what could have happened on his own. And it was during those conversations he had with several people that some things started to come up. Did he see information that would change the direction of that case? There, if things were left as they were, it would be declared a suicide and only the days before the death would be considered. And when Jeremy, Greg's brother, started talking to some people close to him, he realized that maybe an important part of the story was missing. Because from the outside, it looked like everything was beautiful, wonderful, such a cute couple, but nobody looked behind all of that, right? So, Jeremy tried to understand what was really happening during that period in his brothers and sister-in-law's lives. That is, of course, in the periods leading up to the death. And that's when some information started to come up. As soon as Jeremy said, there's something fishy here, something's not adding up. According to Jeremy's investigation, their marriage was going through a serious crisis. Greg had found out that his wife was, messing around with her boss in the lab, that doctor I mentioned to you, Dr. Michael Robertson. And of course, that left Greg completely shaken, and their relationship was, of course, falling apart, crumbling. But that wasn't the only problem. Greg also found out that Christine had started using drugs again, and there was a very troubling suspicion. Some of those drugs might have been taken from the lab where she worked. Remember that she had access to things there and all that? So, when Greg realized all of this, the marriage, as I said, had become unsustainable. And according to reports that came out later during the investigation, he confronted his wife about all of this. And he made it clear that he wasn't willing to just ignore what was happening. And right, shall we continue here? He wanted to put an end to it. But maybe the most important link in all of this is in the statement that, according to the investigation, Greg supposedly made because he went to his wife and said, "Hey, I'm going to report what you're doing, taking the drugs from the lab and all that. This isn't going to stay like this. You and your doctor will have to answer for this, you little troublemakers." This would involve exposing both the extramarital relationship that was happening inside the lab, inside a company, right, with the boss and the employee. And also the theft there, the supposed theft of the drugs inside the lab. If that happened, both careers would go down the drain. That's not it, let's say. We have reasons in our famous trio: means, motives, opportunities. What would you say? Comment. For me, with this whole scenario set up, it's not like that. Greg's death now was, let's say, marked by uncertainties and a lot of tension. But there was another detail in this story, okay, that would only be noticed later. When Gregory de Viller's body was examined for the first time, the doctor responsible for the autopsy was, guess who? Double points if you get it, himself, Dr. Michael. The first autopsy. Guys, just so you have an idea, from the mess that's already forming, isn't it Dr. Michael, the chief doctor and husband of the woman whose husband died of an alleged overdose? Well, intentionally, that's not what happens. It's just that at first, since nobody knew anything, it went by, right? Nobody suspected anything. The guy was just a medical examiner and all. He analyzed the body and life went on. So there wasn't, let's say, any suspicion in quotes, right? The guy did the autopsy there and that was it. And those initial tests indicated the presence of oxycodone and clonazepam in Gregory's system. These medications, when taken in large amounts, can cause respiratory depression, you know? The person ends up with very weak, fragile breathing. Based on these results, the initial conclusion pointed to what I mentioned, not an overdose. And since there were no clear signs of violence, the death started to be treated as a suicide. For the police, at that moment, the case was practically closed, solved. But for Jeremy, as we saw, it was far from being solved. You see, the guy did some work there and started to stir things up. Greg's brother didn't want to accept that simplistic explanation. After all, it seems like he really loved his brother. He wasn't the only one who loved the guy at that moment. So everything Jeremy brought up in his own investigation, let's say, he started doing his thing there. He put together his dossier and took it to the police guys. He got there and said, "Hey guys, you're being lazy, huh? You don't want to do your job. I don't know why, so I did it. Here it is. Take a look, analyze it. At least don't be too lazy to read it, right? Everything's ready. Now go interview this person, interview that one. You're going to uncover some dirt you have no idea about." And finally, that's what led the authorities to make an important decision. Gregory's body would need to be examined again, this time by someone else, of course. And it was in this examination that details came up that changed the case. The second autopsy. With the doubts raised by Jeremy and the possible conflict of interest in the first autopsy, the investigators decided that Gregory's body would need to be examined again. But this time, the work wouldn't be done by the same laboratory. Obviously, to avoid any suspicion of interference, the analyses were sent to an independent laboratory in Los Angeles. It was in this new examination that important discoveries appeared. The first of them was the presence of fentanyl in Gregory's system, and it wasn't a small amount, okay? The test showed an extremely high dosage, about 7 times higher than what's needed to kill a person. Fentanyl is a very potent opioid used in medical settings, mainly for controlling intense pain. But at that time, it wasn't a substance that showed up frequently in regular autopsies. That's kind of how it was, from what I understand, right? From what was released, it's not easy to detect, which raises some doubts, right? If Dr. Michael did the report, well, I don't know, right? Was it done in bad faith, or did he really not notice anything? But in this second analysis then, this substance showed up. And besides fentanyl, the specialists also found those 2 details that were already mentioned here at the beginning of the episode. Gregory showed signs of bronchopneumonia, and his bladder was also full, with more than half a liter of urine. For the doctors who analyzed the case, these 2 elements indicated that Gregory had probably spent several hours unconscious or deeply sedated before he died. That didn't fit with someone who, I don't know, had taken a lethal dose of medication and died on the spot. especially not with someone who prepped that whole scene before dying. Think about it. His bladder was bursting, yet he was setting up to end his life. It doesn't make much sense, obviously, right, guys? But you who are the experts, tell me, please, does it? With these new results, the suicide hypothesis started to lose ground, right? Investigators needed to understand how that amount of fentanyl ended up in poor Gregory's body. When they started to dig deeper into the investigation, several pieces of evidence came up. Among this evidence, there were things that pointed to homicide, weren't there? From that point on, they started to review everything that had happened in the days leading up to Gregory's death. And as the information was being gathered, several elements started to catch the investigators' attention. Some of them, in fact, would later appear in the trial. For example, the scene in the bedroom. It was discovered that Christine had bought red roses. I even mentioned it, right? There were roses there and all. And for that, she used her husband's credit card. And she made this purchase on the day he died. But it was in the afternoon, around 12:45. The petals were all scattered over the bed, exactly where Gregory's body was found. The decorations seemed to recreate, you know that famous scene from the movie American Beauty? Well, the time of the purchase, that time also conflicted with Christine's statement, okay? She had said that at that moment she was at home taking care of her husband, but the card record showed that she was out of the house. The attempt to cremate right after the death also drew attention. Christine authorized the donation of Gregory's organs and showed urgency. She said, "Look, I'll donate the organs and then cremate him right away." Like that, it's not clear what she wanted with that. For the police, that was interpreted as a desperate attempt, actually, to burn evidence as well. But that didn't happen, fortunately, because Gregory's brother, Jeremy, was doing his own investigation there, and he didn't authorize it. Another important point is the behavior. In the morgue, some lab employees later revealed that Christine and Dr. Robertson were seen exchanging kisses and caresses inside the morgue. Can you believe that? And this supposedly happened while the body was still there, waiting for procedures. Also, guys, there's the drug problem, right? During the investigation, it was confirmed that Christine had actually gone back to using methamphetamine, and there was evidence that she was stealing drugs from the lab. Another detail is the phone call to Greg's workplace. On the day of his death, someone had called Gregory's boss, saying that he wouldn't be coming to work that day because he was feeling unwell, sick. That call was made by Christine. And look, maybe here the links are finally coming together. An audit was conducted after all that private investigation by Jeremy, right? The guy was putting a lot of pressure, so they did an audit at the lab where Christine worked. And there, they found out that 15 fentanyl patches and also 10 mg of this substance in injectable form had gone missing from there. Besides that, quantities of oxycodone and clonazepam had also disappeared, as well as methamphetamine. The computer searches, the digital traces also showed up because when the investigators analyzed Christine's computer, they found several searches about fentanyl. Another thing, keep watching, it's all starting to connect, right? It was discovered by the investigation that Christine and Dr. Robertson had attended a medical conference together, where the main focus was the use of fentanyl. When all this information was gathered, the investigators started to believe that Gregory de Villers hadn't taken his own life, right? It was pretty clear that someone had done that to him, administering the lethal dose of fentanyl. And more the evidence pointed to just one person not to arrest in trial. With all this evidence gathered, the investigation moved forward quickly. About 7 months after Gregory's death, the police made a decision. On June 25, 2001, Christine Rawson was arrested, accused of murdering her own husband. Even so, a few months later, she was able to respond to the charges while free on January 4, 2002. According to the records, her parents posted a bail of $1 million, actually more than $1 million. And the trial then began in October 2002. Because the crime occurred in their house without direct witnesses. A large part of the trial was based on technical aspects like forensic analysis, all the scientific parts, and medical experts were called in to analyze the toxicology results. The forensic experts explained to the jury that a person with the amount of fentanyl he had in his system would hardly be able to resist, nor stay conscious for very long, much less perform any normal activity. For example, being able to prepare something for himself anyway. The experts also pointed out another important detail, okay? The analyses indicated that the drugs present in Gregory's system had been administered at different times throughout the day. This suggested that someone could have given him substances gradually, so he wouldn't notice he was being drugged, right? And during the trial, the prosecution presented the theory that Christine had committed the crime to prevent her husband from revealing two things: the relationship with the doctor and the use of the drugs, right, that she was taking from the lab. Of course, the case exploded in the media and the press, and Christine started being called those things, right? By the tabloid press, Black Widow, that kind of thing, and also the Rose Petal Killer. The trial lasted about 3 weeks, but finally the jury reached a verdict. Christine Margaret Rossum was found guilty of first-degree murder, and her sentence was life in prison without parole. In addition, she was fined a sum of money, for something related to the case. Since then, Christine has been serving her sentence at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, the largest women's prison in the United States. But the story didn't completely end there, okay? Because in the following years, the case would return to court for other reasons. In 2006, Gregory's family filed a civil lawsuit for wrongful death. And in that lawsuit, besides Christine, the county itself where the case happened, San Diego, was also included as a defendant. The claim was that Christine's work environment was kind of negligent, right? They didn't know what was going on there, right? She managed to get all the substances and then it was decided, right? The jury was against her again. It was determined that she had to pay more than $100 million in punitive damages to Gregory's family. San Diego County, meanwhile, was ordered to pay $1.5 million. Don't tell me, don't ask me, don't take that out of there. But later, the judge reduced that amount. Okay? The punitive damages were adjusted to 10 million. Oh, now that's affordable, huh? While the compensatory damages stayed around 4.5 million. One of the goals of this lawsuit was also to prevent Christine from profiting from this story. You know that thing where killers write a book about what happened and try to make money off of it, right? It's bizarre, I even mentioned this in another video here. Soon, if this gets legalized, people will start making a business out of it, right? Anyway, guys, while all this was happening, the defense, of course, was trying to overturn the conviction. At a certain point, the lawyers claimed that the samples used in the toxicology tests could have been contaminated before the analysis. According to this line of defense, the samples were stored for about 36 hours in a locked refrigerator before being sent to the lab responsible for the second autopsy. Anyway, right? I didn't really understand that, but it feels like they're suggesting there was some kind of manipulation or something like that. Either way, those appeals were denied. And this crime, of course, became notorious because it's one of the most well-known crimes involving forensic professionals. And over the years, it was portrayed in documentaries and television programs. As for Dr. Michael Robertson, who had left the United States shortly after the investigations began, he returned to Australia, where he continued working in the field of forensic science. I know you guys are wondering about him, right? There isn't that much information about him. It doesn't seem to me that he was officially included as, I don't know, a co-author in the official investigation. I don't know if he went there. There's nothing about extradition. It doesn't seem to be the case, right? I'm just speculating here, but I know the guy is there. Apparently, he's working there professionally, even as a director of a consulting company in that field. And according to statements given in interviews, he has always claimed that he had no involvement in Gregory's murder. Okay, I don't know. It's not that report from the first autopsy. It's what I mentioned to you guys, right? Did the guy really not see this? Although apparently this substance is hard to detect. But I don't know. It seemed kind of sketchy to me, but innocent until proven otherwise. But I want to know what you think about this whole story. Was it just Christine who got her hands dirty in this cowardly crime? Leave your comment here for me. I appreciate your company, a kiss from Rui, and see you next episode.